Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. J.P. Morgan.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, we live in a time of strange methods, huge forces, novel combinations. A titanic world has sprung up around us, and to stand still is to fall, and to fall is to perish. And in the spirit of this age, we gather here tonight to celebrate a mighty venture, a vessel built to rule the waves, a craft of unparalleled size and luxury that shall dominate the transport of souls from the old world to the new. And so, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to give you the only ocean liner worthy of her name and of this age, R.M.S. Titanic.
The Legend of the R.M.S. Titanic, Part 2. It's the early 1900s. A millionaire under the name J.P. Morgan has founded the International Mercantile Marine Company, a company that branches from several different shipping companies owned by J.P. Morgan himself, and one of them was the White Star Line. White Star owned many ships, and Harland & Wolff built the best of them for the White Star Line. However, White Star Line was facing deep competition with one such company, the Cunard Line, which had built vessels for both luxury and speed. White Star Line needed to find ships to compete with Cunard. However, Cunard was already in the head. In 1907, Cunard built two new superliners, R.M.S. Lusitania and R.M.S. Mauretania. Even though Mauretania was faster, Lusitania was more popular. However, these two ships would cause complete competition with White Star Line, as there were four funnel superliners, both were 790 feet long. They needed to find vessels to be much better than Mauretania and Lusitania. And so in 1909, J. Bruce Ismay, the president of the White Star Line at the time, met with a good friend of his, who happened to be the chairman of the Harland & Wolff, the company that built ships for the White Star Line. His name was Lord William Pirrie. He was a very famous businessman and shipbuilder, and was known to making some good ships. And in this case, he and J. Bruce Ismay discussed ways of building a class of 3 new superliners that would be even bigger, more luxurious, and even though slower, more beautiful than Lusitania and Mauretania. These class of ships will be known as the Olympic-class ocean liners, a class of 3 gigantic superliners of the White Star Line. They would have 3 funnels and 4 masts. Each ship would be 882 feet long. These ships would be the most ginormous ships of their time and the most luxurious. And even though not faster than Lusitania and Mauretania, they would compete in luxury and size. However, early in the construction, they decided to change the Olympic class from three funnels to 4 funnels to compete with the size of Lusitania and Mauretania to make them look even more bigger. So the 4th funnel was added as a dummy, not just for good looks and for ventilation purposes. The first ship of the class would be named R.M.S. Olympic, named after the ship that was supposed to be built as the sister ship of R.M.S. Majestic, built in 1899. Her third sister would be named Gigantic. Olympic sister ship, the middle sister of the Gigantic and Olympic, would be the most popular and most famous out of all 3 ocean liners. She would be the most famous ship in the world. Her name was R.M.S. Titanic. Both Olympic and Titanic started construction at the same time. However, it would be Olympic that would be built first. Both of their keels were both laid in 1909, the same year that J.P. Morgan would announce the construction of the new giant ocean liners. Over in the 1910, the 2 ships would dwarf the Harland & Wolff shipyard. In fact, they had to build new gantries to support the new ocean liners, the new superliners of the time. Olympic and Titanic were built side by side together, and this was one of many pictures seen of the 2 sisters. Olympic was the first to be launched. For the special occasion, Her hull was painted white. As Titanic was still under construction, Olympic was ready for her launch date, November 20th, 1910. Dwarfs of people went to see the Olympics launch, the most beautiful ship in the world. She was also the biggest of all. She was the biggest of all White Star liners at the time. She performed beautifully during her sea trials and was put in the service after a few days of open house, where many people were allowed to tour Olympic, the new ship of a new class. Titanic was still under construction at this time. The leader of this design and construction of Olympic and Titanic would be Thomas Andrews, the nephew of William Parry. Andrews was very famous, as he was one of the most respected members of the Harlan and Wolff team, and was put in charge of building White Star Line's new superliners. He would design every single detail to Titanic and Olympic, and lastly, Gigantic. However, due to his fate on April 15, 1912, Gigantic would have to be finished without him. Each Olympic class liner will be separated into 16 water tank compartments with 6 boiler rooms, a reciprocating engine to power the side propellers, and a turbine to power the center propeller. 4 funnels, 1 being a dummy, and 2 masts. However, there were several key things to point out during Titanic's construction. What were they? Let's talk about them. Back then, ships like Titanic were built using rivets. This meant that rivets had to be driven in the ship's hull. They're kind of like bolts the way you see it. However, one thing was that even though they were supposed to be doing a large, heavy riveting machine to rivet the plates in, it was too bulky to be used in the curved areas of the ship, as in the front sections of the ship. So they had to make rivets out of raw iron that were hammered into the curved sections of the ship. This would be Titanic's weak point, as iron becomes weak in cold weather, like the North Atlantic. However, it would be especially cold at the time of the Titanic's main voyage. I'll get to that in a minute. But right off the bat, Titanic was doomed, not even though they didn't even know it. One major defect in Titanic's construction and her overall death was her very own bulkheads. The only bulkhead that was risen high enough to stop water was the head-on collision bulkhead right here. J. Bruce Ismay wanted to lower the bulkheads until 10 feet above the water line. This meant that every single bulkhead before the collision head bulkhead were only 10 feet above the water line. And as you know, water pulls a ship down when it starts to sink. That means that the water will overflow into the next compartment, back and back and back and back. Even though Titanic was supposed to stay afloat with these compartments, either this compartment, 2 compartments, even the first 4 compartments flooded. Not 5. Another key thing to note is Titanic's very own lifeboats. How many were supposed to be on board? Alexander Carlisle, the chief draughtsman for Harlan and Wolff, requested as many as 64 lifeboats, enough for everyone on board, as Titanic was built to withstand 3,000 people. However, the way J. Bruce Ismay put it, the boat deck shouldn't be so cluttered. Passengers don't pay to look at lifeboats. It is easy to say he wanted the luxury, not the safetiness. And also, in British Boards of Trade regulations, required that all British ships with more than 9,072 tons were to carry 16 lifeboats. It would provide space for at least half those on board, as they would ferry survivors to several ships, even though Titanic was considered too big to sink. At the time, no one believed anything about the Titanic would ever sink. They would be terribly wrong. But we'll have to wait until next time. Until then, on May 31st, 1911, Titanic is launched. Now, normally, and this was also put in A Night to Remember, a Titanic film, the most historical film, a ship would be christened, and then a bottle of champagne would be smashed into the hull. White Star didn't do any of that, so this did not happen on Titanic. Titanic is launched in complete success. However, one downside to this was that during this time, Olympic was on loan, and people were allowed to tour Olympic. Now, even though Titanic was Olympic's sister ship, Olympic fairly got more popular at this time than Titanic because more people came to Olympic launch than Titanic. To many of those, Titanic was just Olympic, just bigger. Apparently, over 10,000 people came to watch Titanic's launch. 22 tons of soap and tallow were used to bring the mighty behemoth into the sea for the very first time. After Titanic was launched, fitting was commenced. However, she'll be delayed. On September 20th, 1911, Olympic collided with the cruiser R.M.S. Hawk. At first, it was thought that Hawk was the reason for the collision. However, it was then realized that Olympic had dragged the Hawk into her side because of the huge water displacement. However, only 2 compartments were flooded on Olympic. This also supported the theory of her being unsinkable. Hawk nearly capsized in the incident, but was still able to sail afloat. However, this caused immense strain on White Star Line, as they were forced to pay for the damages to Olympic and Hawk. Olympic had to go in for emergency repairs, while Titanic's construction had to wait. At this time, many parts were cannibalized from Titanic onto Olympic. Mostly the center propeller would become extremely vulnerable in the instant to come. In February 1912, Olympic was involved in yet another incident where she lost a propeller blade. She also had to come in for emergency repairs. Once again, several resources were pulled from Titanic onto Olympic, delaying Titanic's main voyage from March 20th to April 10th. Titanic becomes closer to her main voyage. However, no one knows what's about to happen on April 15th, 1912. Soon we'll learn about her interiors and what made her different than her sister ship Olympic. However, that's a story for another day. Soon the most beautiful ship in the world will be at the bottom of the North Atlantic Ocean with 1,500 souls lost.